The empty closet stared back at me like a gaping wound, hangers swaying gently from where they'd been hastily emptied. My world tilted on its axis as I stood in the doorway of what had been our bedroom for 8 years, clutching the note that would change everything. "Noah, I've taken Jamie to stay with Derek. We won't be coming back. The papers are on the kitchen table. Elena." My hands trembled as the words blurred together, each letter feeling like a physical blow. Elena, my wife of 9 years, the mother of my 6-year-old son Jamie, had vanished while I was at my conference in Seattle. Derek Blackwood, her charming, silver-tongued department head at the marketing firm where she'd worked for the past 3 years, the man she'd assured me was just a mentor when I'd voiced my concerns about their late-night strategy sessions and weekend team-building retreats. I could still smell her jasmine perfume lingering in the air, a cruel reminder of the woman who'd kissed me goodbye just 5 days ago, promising to miss me terribly. The framed photo of our family vacation to Yellowstone last summer sat mockingly on the nightstand. Elena's radiant smile, Jamie perched on my shoulders, all of us blissfully unaware that our happiness had an expiration date. A cold realization washed over me as I noticed her wedding ring sitting deliberately on my pillow, the princess-cut diamond catching the afternoon light like a final, glittering goodbye. Elena and I had met during our senior year at Northwestern in Professor Mitchell's corporate law class. She was the brilliant marketing major who sat 3 rows ahead of me, always raising her hand with insights that made even the professor pause and nod approvingly. I was the quiet business student who'd worked 3 jobs to afford tuition, more comfortable with spreadsheets than small talk. But something about her infectious laugh during study groups drew me in like a moth to flame. Our first date was at a tiny Italian place near campus, where the wine was cheap and the conversation flowed like water. Elena talked about her dreams of revolutionizing brand storytelling, her eyes sparkling with ambition that I found intoxicating. I shared my plans for my own consulting firm, helping small businesses navigate the complexities of corporate growth. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she actually cared about my boring financial projections and market analyses. Back then, she made me feel like I was the most fascinating person in the room. When I landed my first job at Morrison & Associates after graduation, she threw me a surprise party with homemade decorations and my favorite chocolate cake. When I worked 16-hour days during merger season, she'd bring dinner to my office and massage my shoulders while I finished reviewing contracts. She believed in my potential when I was too exhausted to believe in myself. We married 2 years later in her parents' backyard in Evanston, under a canopy of white roses that her mother had cultivated specifically for the occasion. Elena wore her grandmother's vintage lace dress, altered to fit her perfectly, and I couldn't stop staring at her throughout the entire ceremony. Judge Harrison, her father's old law school roommate, performed the service with warmth and humor that made even my stoic father tear up. In my vows, I promised to support her dreams as fiercely as she supported mine. In hers, she promised we'd build something beautiful together. For the first few years, we did exactly that. Elena climbed the ranks at her first marketing firm, while I slowly built my client base at Morrison's. We bought our first house, a charming colonial in Lincoln Park with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that Elena immediately started planning to renovate. Weekends were spent at farmers markets, browsing antique shops for the perfect vintage mirror, or hosting dinner parties where Elena's legendary lasagna always stole the show. When Jamie arrived 3 years into our marriage, Elena transformed into the kind of mother I'd only seen in movies. She sang him to sleep with lullabies in 3 languages, documented every milestone in elaborate scrapbooks, and somehow managed to maintain her career trajectory without missing a single school play or soccer game. I fell in love with her all over again, watching her read bedtime stories with different voices for each character, her face animated with pure joy. But looking back now, I could see the hairline cracks that would eventually become fault lines. Elena had always been ambitious, but somewhere around Jamie's 4th birthday, that ambition took on a different quality. She started talking less about we and more about I. When I suggested she might consider the senior partnership track at my firm, she laughed and said she didn't want to be handed opportunities because of her husband's connections. She wanted to earn everything herself. I should have paid closer attention when she started working late 3 nights a week. I should have questioned why she suddenly needed new business attire, sleek dresses and expensive heels that seemed designed to impress rather than simply look professional. When she mentioned Derek Blackwood's name for the first time, describing him as visionary and someone who really gets the future of marketing, a small warning bell chimed in the back of my mind, but I trusted her. I trusted us. The weekend retreats started 6 months ago. Team building, she called them. Derek thinks the department needs to bond outside the office environment to really unlock our creative potential. She'd returned from these retreats energized in a way I hadn't seen since our early dating days, talking about innovative strategies and breakthrough campaigns with the same sparkle in her eyes she used to reserve for our future together. I tried to be supportive. When she needed to work Saturday afternoons, I took Jamie to the zoo or the children's museum. When she had client dinners that ran until midnight, I handled bedtime routines and morning breakfasts. When she said Derek had invited the team for a long weekend in Wisconsin to really dive deep into the Q4 strategy, I kissed her goodbye and told her to have fun, even though something in my gut twisted uncomfortably. The signs were all there, painted in neon colors I'd chosen to ignore. The way she guarded her phone like state secrets. The new lingerie that never made an appearance in our bedroom. The subtle but growing distance during our conversations, as if part of her mind was always somewhere else. The gradual shift from "How was your day?" to perfunctory check-ins about grocery lists and Jamie's school schedule. In that moment, standing in our gutted bedroom with divorce papers waiting downstairs and my son's favorite stuffed elephant abandoned on his unmade bed, I realized I deserved so much more than I'd been settling for. Elena hadn't just left me for another man. She'd been leaving me by degrees for months, taking pieces of herself away until only a stranger remained. The divorce papers on the kitchen table were thorough in their cruelty. Elena had clearly been planning this for months, consulting lawyers while I believed we were working through a rough patch. Every asset cataloged, every shared memory reduced to line items and dollar amounts. The house we'd lovingly restored together was to be sold, proceeds split down the middle. My retirement accounts, built through years of careful saving, were now subject to division. Most devastating of all was the custody arrangement. Elena was requesting primary custody of Jamie, citing my demanding work schedule and frequent business travel. I spent that first night in our empty house calling Jamie's number obsessively, each attempt going straight to voicemail. Elena had changed his phone, cutting off the nightly bedtime calls that had been our ritual whenever I traveled. The silence in his room was deafening. His baseball glove still sat on his desk where he'd left it after practice last week, alongside the half-finished Lego castle we'd been building together every Sunday morning. Everything changed when Elena began treating me like an obstacle rather than a partner. My attempts to reach out were met with curt responses from Derek's personal assistant, informing me that all communication needed to go through Elena's attorney. When I showed up at Jamie's school to pick him up for our usual Wednesday father-son dinner, the principal awkwardly informed me that Mrs. Rodriguez had called to say Jamie wouldn't be attending that week. Elena had enrolled him in a private school across town, closer to Derek's upscale neighborhood. The few times I managed to speak with Jamie, Elena hovered in the background, monitoring every word. My 6-year-old son, who used to run to me with unlimited enthusiasm, now seemed guarded and confused. "Mommy says you're too busy with work to spend time with us," he said during one brief phone call, his small voice uncertain. "She says Derek takes us to the zoo every weekend and teaches me baseball like you used to." Derek Blackwood wasn't content with stealing my wife. He was systematically replacing me in my son's life. Elena posted photos on social media of their new family adventures. Jamie grinning at Cubs games in seats I could never afford. Elaborate birthday parties at venues that cost more than my monthly mortgage. Weekend trips to luxury resorts where Derek played the doting stepfather role with practiced ease. My mother called weekly, her voice carefully neutral as she tried to offer support without taking sides. Elena always seemed like such a devoted wife, she'd say, confusion evident in her tone. Are you sure there isn't some way to work this out? My father, never one for emotional conversations, simply grunted his disapproval and changed the subject to baseball scores or the weather. My sister Rachel was less diplomatic, calling Elena every name in the book during our late-night phone sessions that left me feeling both validated and exhausted. But it was my business partner Tom who really opened my eyes to what was happening. We'd been friends since college, building Morrison and Associates from a two-man operation into one of Chicago's most respected consulting firms. Tom had watched Elena charm investors at company parties, had seen her play the perfect corporate wife role at client dinners. She's rewriting history, Noah, he told me bluntly over drinks at our usual spot. Making you the villain so she can justify what she's doing. Classic manipulation tactic. The breaking point came on Jamie's 7th birthday. I'd planned a special celebration for weeks. Tickets to the science museum he loved, dinner at his favorite pizza place, and the remote control helicopter he'd been begging for since Christmas. But when I arrived at Elena's new address, a sprawling mansion in Highland Park that screamed Derek's hedge fund money, Jamie barely looked up from the elaborate superhero-themed party already in progress. "Daddy!" he called out, but his excitement seemed forced, coached. "Look what Derek got me!" He held up the latest PlayStation console, a gift that made my carefully chosen helicopter seem pathetic by comparison. Elena emerged from the crowd of Derek's wealthy friends and their perfectly groomed children, looking radiant in a designer dress I'd never seen before. "Noah," she said coolly, "I thought we discussed that you'd see Jamie next weekend. Today is rather complicated." Derek appeared beside her, his hand possessively resting on the small of her back. He was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average height, polished where I was practical, wealthy where I was comfortable, but not extravagant. "Hey there, Noah," Derek said with false warmth, extending his hand in a gesture that felt more like a power play than a greeting. "Elena's told me so much about you. Jamie's been having such a great time with us, haven't you, buddy?" He ruffled my son's hair with casual familiarity that made my stomach clench. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't about Elena falling out of love with me or finding happiness elsewhere. This was about upgrading, trading up to a better model, a more successful provider, a shinier version of the life we'd built together. Derek wasn't just Elena's lover. He was her trophy, proof that she'd moved beyond the limitations of our middle-class existence. "I brought Jamie's birthday present," I said quietly, holding out the wrapped helicopter. Elena barely glanced at it before waving toward a table overflowing with expensive gifts. "How thoughtful. You can just put it with the others." Her dismissive tone cut deeper than any argument we'd ever had. I was being treated like an unwelcome guest at my own son's birthday party, relegated to the status of an inconvenient obligation rather than Jamie's father. As I watched Jamie blow out candles on a cake that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget, surrounded by Derek's family and friends who looked at me with barely concealed pity, I felt a profound sense of clarity wash over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't trying to win Elena back or salvage our marriage. I was simply done. I didn't make a scene. I didn't demand my parental rights or create drama that would traumatize Jamie. Instead, I quietly slipped him his gift, kissed his forehead, and left. In the rearview mirror, I could see the party continuing without missing a beat, as if my presence or absence was completely irrelevant. Driving home through the familiar streets of our old neighborhood, I realized that Elena and Derek had made a crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed I would crumble, that I'd become the bitter ex-husband who fought over scraps of his former life. They thought they could rewrite our story, casting me as the workaholic who'd neglected his family until they had no choice but to seek happiness elsewhere. But they didn't know me at all. They'd forgotten that I'd built a successful business from nothing, that I'd weathered economic downturns and corporate takeovers through careful planning and strategic thinking. Most importantly, they'd underestimated the quiet strength that Elena had once claimed to love about me. I didn't react dramatically or make emotional demands. Instead, I began planning my response with the same methodical precision I brought to my most complex business deals. While Elena was busy playing house with Derek in their Highland Park mansion, I started making moves they'd never see coming. My first call was to Victoria Ashwood, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Chicago. Her reputation preceded her, a woman who'd built her career dismantling the carefully constructed lies of cheating spouses and protecting her clients' interests with surgical precision. Elena's attorney was competent, but predictable, the kind who relied on emotional manipulation and standard custody templates. Victoria was something else entirely. "Mr. Morrison," she said during our initial consultation in her downtown office, her steel-gray eyes studying the divorce papers Elena had filed. "Your wife has made several strategic errors. She's moved in with her paramour before the divorce is finalized, she's alienated you from your child, and she's flaunted her new lifestyle on social media. These are gifts we can use." While Elena and Derek were busy posting photos of their lavish lifestyle on Instagram, I was quietly documenting everything. Screenshots of Jamie at events during school hours, evidence of Elena's increased spending on luxury items, records of denied visitation requests. Victoria's private investigator, a former FBI agent named Patricia Mills, began building a comprehensive file on Derek's business dealings and Elena's new living arrangements. What we discovered was fascinating. Derek Blackwood's hedge fund was under SEC investigation for potential insider trading violations. His divorce from his first wife had been messy, involving allegations of financial impropriety and hidden assets. Most interestingly, he'd been married twice before Elena, both relationships ending when his wives discovered his affairs. Elena wasn't Derek's first office romance. She was his pattern. I didn't confront Elena with this information. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my own foundation. Tom and I had been discussing expansion plans for Morrison and Associates for years, but I'd always been cautious about taking on too much debt. Now, with nothing left to lose, I greenlit our most ambitious project yet, opening branch offices in 3 major cities and bringing on board the kind of high-profile clients we'd previously only dreamed of landing. The timing couldn't have been better. Our biggest competitor, Hendricks & Partners, had just lost their founding partner to a scandal, creating an opening in the market for a firm with our reputation for discretion and results. Within 6 weeks, we'd poached 3 of their senior consultants and landed 2 Fortune 500 accounts that tripled our annual revenue overnight. My mother had introduced me to someone she thought I should meet, Isabelle Laurent, a successful art gallery owner whose own marriage had ended badly 2 years earlier. Unlike Elena's desperate need to broadcast her happiness, Isabelle maintained an elegant privacy that I found refreshing. She was beautiful in an understated way, with dark hair always pulled back in a classic chignon and an extensive knowledge of contemporary art that made our conversations intellectually stimulating in ways I hadn't experienced in years. "Your wife was a fool," Isabelle said softly during one of our quiet dinners at Le Bernardin, her French accent adding sophistication to words that would have sounded harsh from anyone else. "A woman who has a man who builds empires with quiet strength and throws it away for flashy nonsense. She deserves what's coming to her." Isabelle understood the game Elena was playing because she'd watched her own ex-husband play it. The difference was that Isabelle had been smart enough to protect herself financially from the beginning. She'd built her gallery into one of Chicago's most prestigious art destinations, while her husband was busy chasing his secretary. When he'd finally left, expecting her to crumble, she'd simply smiled and wished him well, knowing that his new lifestyle was unsustainable without her family's money backing him. "Revenge," she told me over wine that cost more than Elena's monthly car payment, "is living well and watching them destroy themselves. You don't have to push. Gravity does the work for you." Meanwhile, Elena's social media presence was becoming increasingly frantic. Where her early posts had been subtle celebrations of her new life, they were now desperate displays of manufactured happiness, photos of expensive dinners she tagged Derek in, but his body language suggested he was already growing tired of the performance. Videos of Jamie at events where he looked overwhelmed rather than excited, being paraded around Derek's social circle like a prop in their domestic theater. My own social media remained strategically sparse. An occasional photo of a successful client meeting, a sophisticated dinner with Isabel at a gallery opening, images from business trips to New York and London that suggested expansion and success without being ostentatious. I was building a narrative of quiet prosperity and genuine contentment that stood in stark contrast to Elena's desperate theater. Victoria's investigation was yielding dividends. Derek's SEC troubles were escalating, with the investigation expanding to include his personal finances. Elena, now living in his house and financially dependent on him, was about to discover that her wealthy boyfriend's assets were largely leveraged and potentially frozen. The private school tuition, the luxury vacations, the designer clothes, all of it was funded by money that might not exist once federal investigators finished their work. More importantly, we'd discovered that Derek had been telling his friends a very different story about Elena. According to Patricia's sources at his country club, he'd been complaining that Elena was clingy and her son was too much responsibility. He'd apparently told his golf buddies that he was thinking about ending things once the novelty wore off, but felt trapped because Elena had nowhere else to go. I was also quietly rebuilding my relationship with Jamie through channels Elena couldn't control. His school counselor, Mrs. Peterson, had grown concerned about his behavioral changes and emotional withdrawal. With Victoria's help, I'd established regular meetings to discuss Jamie's well-being, documenting every missed school event Elena claimed was due to my abandonment and every sign of emotional distress that coincided with his time at Derek's house. The most satisfying moment came when Elena's own mother called me. Margaret had always been polite, but distant, clearly preferring her daughter's version of events. But 3 months into Elena's new life, cracks were showing. "Noah," she said hesitantly over the phone, "I wanted to apologize for not reaching out sooner. Elena seemed so happy at first, but lately, Jamie seems confused when we talk to him. And this Derek person." She trailed off, clearly struggling with her loyalty to her daughter and her growing concerns. I reassured Margaret that I held no grudges and was focused entirely on Jamie's well-being. By the end of our conversation, she was asking if there was anything she could do to help ensure her grandson's stability. Elena's own support system was beginning to question her choices, leaving her increasingly isolated in Derek's world of superficial relationships and conditional acceptance. The beautiful part of my strategy was its simplicity. I wasn't plotting elaborate revenge schemes or trying to destroy Elena's life. I was simply building something better while allowing their own choices to create natural consequences. Derek's financial problems would surface whether I exposed them or not. Elena's emotional neediness would drive him away, whether I interfered or not. Jamie's confusion and distress would become apparent to everyone who cared about him, whether I highlighted it or not. All I had to do was be ready when their house of cards finally collapsed, which, based on Victoria's timeline, would be very soon indeed. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing expansion plans with Tom. Victoria's voice carried a note of satisfaction I'd rarely heard from her. "Noah, you need to see the news. Derek Blackwood's hedge fund was just raided by federal agents. Assets frozen, accounts seized, criminal charges pending." I pulled up the financial news on my laptop, watching footage of FBI agents carrying boxes out of Derek's downtown office. The charges were extensive: securities fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. The investigation Elena thought was minor had exploded into a federal case that would likely send Derek to prison for the next decade. More immediately relevant to my situation, all of his assets, including the Highland Park mansion, were now subject to federal seizure. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Noah, it's Elena. Can we talk? It's urgent." After months of communicating only through lawyers, her direct contact felt almost surreal. I forwarded the message to Victoria and waited for her guidance. Her response was swift. "Let her sweat. She'll call again." She did, 3 hours later, then 6 more times that evening. Each voicemail grew progressively more desperate, her carefully maintained composure cracking like ice in spring. "Noah, please. I know you're angry, but Jamie needs stability right now. The house, Derek's situation, it's complicated. Maybe we could meet for coffee? Just to talk about Jamie?" I didn't respond. Instead, I had dinner with Isabel at her gallery's new exhibition opening, surrounded by Chicago's cultural elite. Photographs from the event appeared in the Tribune Society pages the next morning. Isabel and me standing next to a stunning Monet acquisition, both of us looking effortlessly sophisticated. The caption mentioned my firm's recent international expansion and Isabel's upcoming solo show in New York. We looked like exactly what we were becoming, successful people building something meaningful together. Elena's second wave of calls began that afternoon, this time with a different tone entirely. I saw the pictures in the paper. "Noah, what we had was real. Don't let some rebound relationship make you forget our history. Jamie keeps asking when he can come home to his real house, to his room with his things." The irony was exquisite. Elena, who'd spent months parading Derek around like a trophy, was now panicking that I'd found someone genuinely worthy of my time. But more than that, she was discovering what I'd known all along, that Derek's world was built on illusion and leverage, while what we'd created together had been solid and real. The formal custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, but Elena's position had become untenable overnight. Victoria had documentation showing that Jamie was now technically homeless, his school enrollment in jeopardy, his mother financially dependent on a man facing federal prosecution. The judge who'd initially seemed sympathetic to Elena's claims about my work schedule would now see her as an unstable parent who'd prioritized personal gratification over her child's security. 3 days before the hearing, Elena appeared at my office unannounced. My assistant, trained to handle such situations with discretion, called security while informing me of her presence. When I finally agreed to see her, the woman who entered my office bore little resemblance to the confident, glowing person who'd left me 6 months earlier. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup, replaced by wrinkled jeans and the kind of exhaustion that comes from genuine desperation. Her hair, once perfectly styled for social media photos, hung limp and unwashed. She looked like someone who'd been running from creditors and sleeping in her car, which, according to Patricia's latest report, wasn't far from the truth. "Noah," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I made a mistake. A terrible, awful mistake. Derek he wasn't who I thought he was. The things I've learned about him, the way he treats people when he doesn't need them anymore." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Jamie misses you so much. He cries every night asking when we can go home." Looking at her across my mahogany desk, I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just a profound sense of detachment, as if I were observing a stranger's problems from a great distance. This woman had systematically dismantled our family, alienated me from my son, and publicly humiliated me while flaunting her affair. Now she wanted absolution because her gamble hadn't paid off. "Elena," I said calmly, "you made your choice. You chose Derek over our family. You chose his money over our marriage. You chose to keep Jamie from me when it served your narrative. These aren't mistakes. They're deliberate decisions with predictable consequences." She leaned forward desperately. "But we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work things out. I'll sign whatever prenup you want, give you full custody initially, anything. Just please don't let Jamie grow up thinking his family completely fell apart." The proposal was everything I'd dreamed of hearing 6 months ago when I'd first found that empty closet. Complete capitulation, acknowledgement of her wrongs, willingness to rebuild on my terms. But standing in my corner office, wearing a custom suit that Isabel had helped me select, looking at quarterly reports showing unprecedented growth in my business, I realized I didn't want Elena back on any terms. The hearing is Monday, I said simply. My lawyer will be seeking full custody and supervised visitation rights for you. Jamie deserves stability, and you've proven you can't provide that. As for us, there is no us anymore. There's just two people who need to figure out how to co-parent effectively. Elena's face crumpled as the reality of her situation fully hit her. You're really not going to take me back? Even after everything we built together? Even for Jamie's sake? Everything we built together was destroyed when you chose someone else, I replied. What I'm building now is better. And Jamie deserves to be part of something stable and genuine rather than whatever chaos you and Derek created. She left my office in tears, but I felt only relief. That evening, I picked up Jamie from Elena's temporary apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a complex that accepted month-to-month leases. My son ran to me with the uninhibited joy I remembered from before this whole nightmare began. "Daddy, Mom said I get to stay with you for a while. Can we finish building the Lego castle? Can Isabel come see it? She's really nice, and she knows about art like you know about business." 6 months later, Jamie and I were living in a beautiful new house in Winnetka, his room filled with the toys and books he'd chosen himself, rather than expensive gifts designed to impress other adults. Elena had managed to find work as a junior marketing coordinator at a small firm, a significant step down from her previous position, but honest employment that allowed her to rebuild her life slowly and deliberately. Derek Blackwood was serving a 12-year federal sentence, his assets liquidated to pay restitution to investors. Elena's supervised visits with Jamie had gradually evolved into normal co-parenting arrangements as she demonstrated genuine commitment to stability over drama. The real surprise came when Isabel and I announced our engagement at her gallery's anniversary celebration. Unlike my first wedding, this ceremony would be a sophisticated affair reflecting who we'd become. Successful, mature people choosing each other from positions of strength rather than youthful hope. As I watched Jamie help Isabel arrange flowers for the engagement party, both of them laughing at some private joke, I realized that sometimes the best revenge truly is living well. Elena had thought she was trading up when she chose Derek, but in reality, she'd freed me to find someone who genuinely appreciated the man I'd become, rather than trying to change me into someone else. The last time Elena and I spoke about anything other than Jamie's schedule, she admitted something that surprised me. I always thought I needed more excitement, more luxury, more attention than what we had. But what we had was actually everything I needed. I just didn't realize it until I threw it away for something that looked shinier. I told her I was glad she'd found that peace, and I meant it. But I also made it clear that realization had come too late. I'd chosen the woman who'd been called the Villainess by Elena's friends for refusing to enable Derek's behavior, and it turned out the Villainess was exactly the heroine my story needed.